And now in the United States, where more than 770,000 people experienced homelessness in one single night in 2024. Hari Srinivasan speaks to Donald Whitehead Jr., Executive Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless, who's experienced this struggle firsthand.
Christian, thanks. Donald Whitehead, thanks so much for joining us. President Trump recently laid out an executive order about homelessness. What's it about?
It covers a number of things, all very horrifying. It encourages cities to enforce forced institutionalization in mental health institutions and jails, and we think maybe even detention camps, and forcing people into substance abuse treatment. It also discourages some of the programs that we have seen have best outcomes. They are best practices. Those programs are discouraged, and funding will be taken away if people use things like harm reduction or if they don't criminalize people.
In there, it says, surrendering our cities and citizens to disorder and fear is neither compassionate to the homeless nor any other citizens. My administration will take a new approach focused on protecting public safety. Is public safety a problem because of an increase in the homeless population?
The safety is really people experiencing homelessness who are more likely, and people with mental health issues who are far more likely to be victimized than any member of the public. And furthermore, I would say that this particular executive order doesn't do anything to solve homelessness. If you incarcerate people, if you use involuntary placement in mental institutions, it does not solve homelessness. What solves homelessness is housing, supportive services, healthcare, and jobs that pay livable wages.
So there's a couple of different layers I want to unpack here. When you look at the surveys over time, isn't homelessness on the rise?
Sure, homelessness is on the rise, but it's on the rise for reasons other than anything related to criminalization. Homelessness is on the rise because housing costs are on the rise. So there's a direct correlation between the rise in housing costs across the country and the number of people who are experiencing homelessness. We see a rise in the number of people 55 and older experiencing homelessness. We've also seen a rise in these kind of practices that criminalize. And what I mean by criminalize is they jail, they ticket, and they fine people experiencing homelessness, which actually increases the likelihood that they won't be able to get out of homelessness. So I believe that the criminalization, we've seen 320 new cities institute laws that would criminalize homeless people since the dreadful Supreme Court decision last year that said, even though nowhere in this country there's enough shelter or enough housing for people experiencing homelessness, cities are able to institute these measures that criminalize people experiencing homelessness.
So we saw that in part as a reaction to the encampments that were happening in cities like, say, Portland, Oregon, or Los Angeles, et cetera, and that there are now cities who want to prevent that from happening in their own backyard, right? Now, I wonder, at the same time, when you look at the perception of reality, the public opinion polls, you see an increasing number of people saying that homelessness is a problem. Is that because of how these stories, for example, come out on the news or on YouTube, et cetera, or is there something else?
Well, I think public perception is actually guided by misinformation. So we've done our own internal polling, and we've worked with other groups that are in the homeless sector. And what we find is that 70% of the people do think that there is an issue with homelessness, but they don't believe that you should fine, arrest, or jail people. Again, that does not solve homelessness. What we need to solve homelessness is more affordable housing. We need a dramatic influx of housing production in this country if we're going to solve homelessness. If you look at reports out of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, you'll see that a housing wage in this country is above $20 an hour. Minimum wage is $7 an hour. People can't keep up with housing under those conditions. We don't think people should be living under bridges and in abandoned buildings and in encampments, especially our elderly population, children, other groups. No one should have to live outside. Everybody should have a decent, safe, and affordable home, but we're not producing more housing. The president's budget actually zeroed out housing programs. It actually would cut term limits for housing, so people would only be able to stay in housing for 2 years. Those are all recipes for disaster. And so this administration needs to really use evidence-based information and look at the true underlying structural causes of homelessness.
So what does the evidence-based information say? What are programs that actually help people not be homeless anymore?
A great question. One is the permanent supportive housing program. Now, when researchers have looked at that program, there is a 90% success rate. One of the provisions in this executive order says that people utilizing those kinds of programs. So this is a program where people are taken off the street, they're put in their housing unit, and they're provided an array of wraparound services for mental health, for substance abuse. And this program is designed for people who have been homeless the longest, who have the highest probability of not being able to get out on their own. And we know that those services, substance abuse treatment, behavioral health treatment, all of those things are better done for people in a stable unit. It's really hard to provide those kind of services when someone is sleeping in an outdoor location. That program, again, has a 90% success rate in studies. And so it just absolutely boggles the mind to think that that kind of program would be one that this administration has an issue with.
So, you're saying, for example, the 90% success rate based on the facts of how these programs work and what's been measured. But there's also this perception that, providing more services to homeless people or mentally ill people, this is to some extent their fault. They got themselves into this, and that we collectively should not be trying to give them, assistance after a certain point. What's wrong with that?
Well, a lot of things that are wrong with that. In fact, we know that behavioral health issues, mental health issues, disability issues, developmental delays are medical issues. People don't cause themselves to have those kinds of issues. Substance abuse is a disease. So these are not moral failures. Homelessness didn't increase to the level it is because people failed morally. It increased because we stopped providing mental health services after deinstitutionalization. We stopped providing jobs that pay livable wages in this country. It now costs, again, over $20 an hour if you only pay 30% of your income for housing to be able to afford the housing long term. These are structural issues. It's not a personal moral failure that there is an overrepresentation of people of color in the homeless population. Most African Americans, people from the Native American community are severely overrepresented, and it doesn't correlate with poverty. So we have some deep, deep structural issues that we have to solve if we're going to change homelessness. And the last thing I'll say about that is that the reason we are here is because every other time there's been 4 segments of homelessness in our history in this country. Every other time there has been a response from the federal government that lowered those numbers, made those numbers virtually disappear. And I'm talking about New Deal programs, Social Security, Medicare. We have not seen that in the last 40 years. This is the longest continuous period of homelessness, and we've never provided resources to the level of the problem.
If we see that this problem has been getting worse, is that an indictment on the fact that our policies are not working. I mean, maybe that's part of what's motivating this approach by the administration.
So again, I would say that when we have done things that would be preventative in nature, that prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, expanded housing production, it has worked. We saw that during COVID. We saw communities move away from congregate shelters with hundreds, maybe thousands of people to smaller individual settings. We saw eviction prevention dollars put in place. We saw emergency housing vouchers, and housing vouchers are one of the best solutions to homelessness. The permanent supportive housing program I talked about is a great program for a portion of the population. It is not a be all and end all. We need much more. We need vouchers. Everybody deserves, again, a safe place to live. Another issue that this executive order fails to recognize is the number of children that we see enter this population. Certainly, we don't consider our children in the school system, almost 1.5 million of them, criminals. So there's a need to look at this issue comprehensively. What we've been forced to do as a sector is to choose portions of the population because we were forced to operate in a scarcity model where they picked the population. Sometimes it was veterans, sometimes it was the chronically homeless, but we never have gotten to scale with the resources for this issue where it was a comprehensive solution. So I agree with you. The policies have been failed, but the policies are not on the part of people experiencing homelessness. They should not be blamed for the growth of homelessness. We have a federal government and elected officials who have never addressed the problem in a comprehensive way.
When you look at the population of homelessness, is the proportion of people with mental illnesses and mental health problems rising? I mean, the numbers in New York, it's somewhere around 17% and almost a quarter of the population in California. I mean, is the administration right to try and target this population? The president says for those who are severely mentally ill and deeply disturbed, we will bring them to mental institutions where they belong with the goal of reintegrating them back into society once they are well enough to manage.
Well, it is certainly a great need. We do have a portion of the population that does suffer from mental illness, and many that suffer from severe mental illness. We learned in the 50s, we learned almost 70 years ago that was not putting large numbers of people into mental institution was a failed policy. That's how we got to deinstitutionalization. What was a much better solution was smaller community-based facilities where people got to have agency, but address their mental health at the same time. So what is being proposed is detention camps and putting people in institutions, basically warehousing them. And there is no housing that's attached to this. So that's a very important point here. So if you put people in those institutions, and I'll repeat this, or you put them in a correction facility, one of the largest concentrations of people that have mental health issues is the Los Angeles County Jail, for instance. They don't have housing when they leave those institutions. And so you haven't done anything but disappeared people, made people believe that you were doing something to address homelessness when really you're hiding the issue. But it does not solve homelessness. It removes people from systems of care that they've engaged in that will help towards their eventual escape from homelessness. People are forced into that issue. They want treatment. The treatment's just not available. New York tried to do a forced institutionalization. They found that they were hundreds of thousands of beds less than the need for people that needed that particular intervention. And that would be the same everywhere in this country. We have to do something very different than warehousing people. It does not work. We've seen horrific videos 50 years ago, and we don't want to return to that. But we think this is kind of a recipe for us to return to that.
Is the executive order constitutional? Is this going to be challenged in the courts?
So I think it'll be challenged in the courts, but it is crafted in a way that the administration will have a little bit of freedom until they actually start to implement it. So there certainly will be challenges, but not immediately because of the way it's crafted. So we have been in touch with some of the larger legal institutions in the country and those within the homeless sector, and we are crafting a strategy. This won't go unaddressed. It won't be. We will provide a legal resistance to this particular order, and that idea is being shaped now.
Donald, why is this so personal for you?
Part of it is because I care about other people, but the other issue is I've experienced homelessness myself, and I experienced it twice. I experienced it as a child, and I experienced it as an adult. And since that time, I've been able to save tens of maybe hundreds of thousands of people. I put 200 people that I found on the streets of Prince George's County, Maryland, into units during COVID. So it is very personal. I talk to people experiencing homelessness every day, and I'll tell you, I answer an email box that is frequently and every day I see more and more people that are really, really concerned. They're saying, I'm homeless and I just heard that I'm going to be arrested. What should I do? Those are the kind of things I'm hearing in our info box. So every one of those stories touches me. Because of my own personal experience. I know what it's like to be homeless. I know what it's like to be harassed while I was on the street. So it really hits home on a personal level. And I am committed to doing everything I can to make sure that we push back against this executive order.
Executive Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless, Donald Whitehead, thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you bringing attention to this issue. It is so important.
Well, since President Trump returned to office more than 7 months ago, the U.S., as we know it, has been undergoing some dramatic shifts. As we mentioned earlier, prominent hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio warned this week that the nation is sliding into a 1930s-style autocracy. So how did we get here? Former Clinton Secretary of Labor Robert Reich believes what we're seeing today is the result of a series of economic and political choices made in the last 50 years. He chronicles them in his recent memoir, Coming Up Short. It's a great title, I have to say. He joins Walter Isaacson to discuss what Democrats should do to respond to Trumpism.
Thank you, Bianna and Robert Reich. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Walter. It's good to see you.
Your book is Coming Up Short, a memoir of my America. I want to focus on that subtitle because one of the things that struck me when I read the book last night is that you take your own life story and make it into an allegory about America in that period. How'd you do that and why?
Well, first of all, Coming Up Short is indeed a double entendre because, as you know, I'm very short. But also America, I believe, came up short, in the sense that I was privileged to be a member of the post-war baby boom. I don't presume to know exactly how old you are, Walter. I think you're younger. I'm sure you're younger than I am. But that post-war baby boom generation, the year I was born, featured just within a few months of my birth, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. And the book focuses really on what we did, not necessarily those individuals entirely. I also include Clarence Thomas and many others of us who came to our adulthood in the 1960s, 1970s, and had an opportunity to take the legacy we were given by the so-called greatest generation and continue that legacy in terms of building a very strong American middle class and a stronger democracy. But we came up short in the sense that we ended up with Donald Trump as president. And I think that Donald Trump is not the source of our problems. What I say in the book is that Donald Trump is more the consequence or the culmination of a lot of failures over the last 40 or 50 years to deal with widening inequality and the problems faced by the American working class that ultimately chose him as president.
Well, let me talk about the baby boom generation. Talk about somebody born the year you were born, late 1940s, had about an 80% chance of being financially better off than their parents. If you're born in the 80s or 90s, you have less than a 50% chance of being better off financially. That seems huge to me. What happened? Why?
In the late 70s, there was kind of a giant U-turn, and I get into this in the book. We, instead of continuing to grow the middle class, we actually decided, and I say we figuratively, it was not everybody in America, it was actually an increasingly politically potent corporate culture, big corporations and wealthy individuals whose money began to dominate American politics in a way that did rig the market. Now, I don't want to be too dramatic about it or sort of parrot exactly what Bernie Sanders and others have said, but there's a lot of truth to it. The market did change. And that meant that if you were a non-college graduate, and if you were brought up in the Middle West or in the South, and you didn't have the opportunities you had. You were no longer a member of a union. Unions were about, and they constituted something in the order of 35% of all the private sector workers in the 1960s or 70s, and then declined to today, now 6% of private sector workers. In many, many respects, monopolization, for example, big companies became much, much stronger, monopolized their markets in ways that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they did not. The combination of all of the ways in which the market was rigged made it very difficult to fulfill what you're referring to, and that is the social contract that we had coming out of the Second World War.
One of the themes in your book is bullying, and you were bullied as a kid. And in some ways, you say that's what's happened to the average American. Explain that.
Well, I became quite sensitive to the issue of bullying because I am short, and I was, like many children are, bullied in school. But one of my protectors, one of the older boys I kind of leaned on or relied on to protect me from the bullies, himself was bullied in a much more profound way when he was registering voters in 1964. His name was Michael Schwerner. He and two other civil rights workers were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. And then, in many ways, Walter, changed my life and my view of bullying. I began to see that bullying was about power. It is about power. It's about people with power abusing that power and treating others without power in ways that exploit them. And I'm talking about employers and employees, or men bullying women, or white supremacists bullying black people. I mean, you see bullying all over. And as inequality has widened in America over certainly the last 40 years, the opportunities for the bullies, those at the top who have a great deal of resource, to take out their bullying on people who are weaker than they are, have increased. Donald Trump is the bully of bullies. I think that he was elected in part because a lot of people who felt so bullied by the system saw him as somebody who could bully everybody else. of course, he is not a representative of the working class. He actually has provided huge tax cuts to the wealthy and deregulated Wall Street and deregulated the environment and made, I think, over time, the working class much more vulnerable. Nevertheless, that was his selling.
Wait. Then why did he get a plurality of the votes?
I think he got a plurality of votes in 2024, you're referring to, because the Democrats did not come up with a response to the bullying. You see, and I get at this in the book, and this is something that I've been harping on, Walter, for years, and that is that the Democrats need to explain to the working class, to the vast middle class that has felt bullied, why the market is rigged against them. Democrats need to point out that the large corporations and the wealthy people who are putting huge amounts of money into American politics are doing this in ways that hurt much of the middle class and certainly the working class. And as a result, the Democrats have not provided, as has Donald Trump and some Republicans before him, an explanation. Now, the Trump explanation, remember, has been about cultural bullies. The Trump explanation has been, well, it's the deep, the deep state, or it's immigrants, or it's people who are different, such as transgender youth. The cultural culprits here are not responsible for why most Americans feel bullied. But if the Democrats don't point out the real bullies, then there's no opportunity for anybody to know what's going on. And as a result, Donald Trump or demagogues like him are elected, or will be, and will continue to be elected as far as the eye can see. Democrats have got to name and be clear about who the national bullies really are, why there is brutality in the system, why there is abuse of power in the system.
When did Democrats lose touch with the working class?
Well, in the book, I trace it back to the 1990s. I am very, very proud to have been a member of the Clinton administration. I think we accomplished a great deal. But I think that Bill Clinton and a lot of the Democrats associated with the Democratic Leadership Council, do you remember them? The so-called moderate Democrats, the new Democrats, they refused to and were unwilling to really make the kind of alliance with organized labor, with the grassroots groups, name the kind of brutality and the bullies that were really beginning to have a great deal of power in America because of all the money in American politics. And I think that and in adopting free trade and in deregulating Wall Street, and in taking their eyes off monopolies, and allowing the companies to basically bash unions and get rid of unions. All of this helped pave the way for Donald Trump.
In the book, actually, you trace it even further back to some extent, even to the Port Huron statement and the progressive left of the 60s and 70s. Explain how you think that may have led the Democratic Party astray of getting too much into this progressive left ideology.
Well, I don't really take on, as you put it, progressive left ideology in the sense that I think the core problem, of the Port Huron statement, I viewed as a very important, I still do view as a very important statement with regard to the kind of populist leanings of our generation, my generation. But I think that it left out the working class. And many of the reform movements of the 60s, 70s, and 80s left out the working class. The women's movement was very important, obviously. even the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement. I mean, I was part of that. The anti-Vietnam War movement, the movement to provide equal marriage rights. All of them terribly important. But what was left out was the working class and the labor movement, and the core responsibility of the Democratic Party as a legacy of Franklin D. Roosevelt, to represent the people who did not have power, represent people who were really left out of power. But it's not too late. I think that Donald Trump and the Trump administration gives the Democrats and progressives an opportunity to do what they did not do in the 80s and 90s and even at the turn of this century, and that is reclaim the ground that was lost, because the Trump administration is really something that is so different from what the conservative Republicans had represented and tried to achieve. It is, in a sense, an administration that is more closely aligned. And I'm going to use a word here that I rarely use, and I apologize in advance. But the Trump administration is closely aligned with fascist movements in history, and right-wing movements in Europe, neo-Nazi movements around the world, particularly in Europe. And this gives this gives the Democrats enormous opportunity to refashion a coalition and create a new multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-class coalition that is not just based on democracy. Yes, that's important. That's critically important. But it's also based on widening prosperity for everyone.
You use the incredibly loaded word fascism. And in your book, you have Henry Wallace, the Democrat, very progressive Democrat, writing an essay about fascism. I think it's in the 1940s.
1944. Well, it was interesting. Henry Wallace, a vice president at the time to Franklin D. Roosevelt, wrote in the New York Times Magazine a very important article, lost mostly to history. I tried to revive it, in which he warns of American fascism. And this is at a time we're fighting the Second World War, but Wallace sees. He writes this article with a permission of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He writes about the underpinnings of monopolization of the very crude efforts to destroy American unions, to labor unions, the efforts of white supremacists to reassert themselves through this kind of quiet fascism that he sees. It's an undercurrent in America that Henry Wallace identifies, and that undoubtedly has been there before and has been there since, at least since the 1930s, and is now expressing itself in ways that I think Wallace had very presciently seen possible.
You talk about the populism of the right and moving towards authoritarianism. Is there a possibility of an economic populism of the left? And who do you think would, how would that be expressed within the Democratic Party in the U.S.?
Well, there is a populism of the left. I mean, Bernie Sanders was the best exponent and an expression of that. But he was saying something that resonated with many Americans. And that is that we've got to take our country back economically from big corporations, from wealthy people that are abusing their wealth and their power. I mean, he was hearkening back to something that Louis Brandeis, the great jurist, was reputed to have said in the 1920s, which is that America has a choice. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few people, or we can have a democracy, but we can't have both. And Bernie Sanders came very, very close to getting the Democratic nomination. Now, history will not know whether he could have beaten Donald Trump, who was also improbable. I remember, Walter, I was doing a book in 2015, some research for a book. I went around many places in the Midwest of the South doing kind of a focus groups, really free-floating focus groups. And I remember asking people all over the country, particularly in the Rust Belt in the South, if you had to vote today, who would you vote for your next president? Now, this is 2015, when Hillary Clinton was the putative nominee for the Democrats, and Jeb Bush was the putative nominee for the Republicans. And I kept on hearing again and again people saying, well, we want either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, how can you put Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in the same sentence? But the fact was that even in 2015, people who felt bullied, and I'm going to use that metaphor because that it really does describe the people that I met, and so many people across the country, and still does. They wanted somebody who would stop the bullying.
Robert Reich, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Now, as the Trump administration's battle with the courts escalates, one legal expert is taking a step back to reimagine what a more representative U.S. legal system could look like. Best-selling author Elie Mystal tells Hari Srinivasan about his unconventional theory explored in his latest work.
Christian, thanks. Elie Mystal, thanks so much for joining us. Your new book, with a fantastic title, I might add, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. It focuses on 10 laws that you say, if repealed, would make America better. First of all, where do you even start? How do you figure out which 10 to go after to write a book about?
Thank you so much for having me, Hari. Yes, scoping is obviously the very first problem for a book like this. There are many laws. Many of them are terrible. I have not read them all. So there is a large universe that you're working from. But the way that I started to whittle it down and scope it was to try to think of laws that could just be repealed. There are many bad laws that need to be reformed, updated, massaged, brought into our modern age. And I kind of left those to the side and focused on the ones that we could just be rid of. We could be rid of today and would make our world better tomorrow. So that's kind of where I started the scope. And then the second valence I looked at was the subtitle of the book, 10 Popular Laws that Are Ruining America. So I tried to focus on laws that enjoyed broad bipartisan support at the time they were passed. You see, this book is about laws that are working as intended. The racism or the misogyny or the anti-poverty, the stuff that the laws are doing was what the people who passed the laws wanted them to do, right? And so I tried to really hone in on laws that people liked at one time, both parties, both of them. Again, a lot of this book is a bipartisan look at mistakes that both parties have made. Now, belatedly, in a lot of cases, Democrats have been like, well, that was a terrible mistake. We never should have passed it. But the law's still there. And you don't see Democrats agitating and organizing to repeal to fix their own mistakes of the past. And so that's kind of how I scoped the book down to just 10.
You say in there, if it were up to me, I'd treat every law passed before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as presumptively unconstitutional. The government of this country was illegitimate when it ruled over people who had no ability to choose the rules. Explain.
Well, I wouldn't give the laws passed before the Voting Rights Act, which I argue is the most important piece of legislation in American history, because it's the first piece of legislation that made us anything approaching a democracy or a republic as opposed to an apartheid state. And so if you bring to me a law that's passed before everybody who was living here had a reasonable opportunity to vote on the law and vote on the representatives who would make those laws, then I'm just not going to give it a whole lot of deference, right? I'm not saying that you can completely ignore those laws, but certainly when you think about how a court gives deference, it gives deference to the will of Congress or the will of the people when it's making their decisions, I wouldn't give it deference at all, right? You bring me a law from 1921, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Do you have anything supporting your case from after apartheid? Do you have anything supporting your case from, I don't know, the 1970s, right? And if you can't give me a reason for your law to exist or your argument to win with a modern argument, then I would disregard your antebellum arguments.
Well, let's talk a little bit about who gets to vote. You lay out in the book that America is sort of different than other democracies. What is America not getting right or could get better?
Okay, so one of I would say the key stupid thing that we do is that we don't have one national electoral system. Our electoral system flows up from the states. So instead of one federal election system, we have 50 different federal election systems, and each state has its own rules for who's eligible, who has to register, when you can start voting, whether or not you can early vote, can you cure your votes after they've been cast, what's the process for mail-in ballots, when the registration date. It's ridiculous. It is, and it's different in every state, depending on what side of the river you happen to be on, whether or not you're allowed to vote on Saturday or not. That is not what all of the other major democracies in this world do. They've fixed this problem. They have one national electoral system. And that not only allows for, I think, more confidence in the system, it also allows for less friction in the system. And that, to me, is the real key point here. It makes it easier for people to vote when there's only one system that they have to familiarize themselves with, right? So at an alpha kind of 30,000 foot level, our inability to have a national election system is a fundamental problem with our country.
You have a whole chapter called How Did Immigrants Become Illegal? You say it was invented basically with the stated intentional goal of keeping America white and Protestant. How do you think we should be approaching it?
Yeah. So again, throughout my book, I don't ask people to take my word for it. I go back and I look at the actual language from the people who passed the law. In the case of the 1921 Immigration and Nationalization Act, which is what is our foundational immigration law in this country, this law heavily relied on the science of America's leaning eugenicist, Harry Laughlin. So, that's kind of a problem. And the congressman at the time, as they were passing the law, said that this law was necessary to stop the mongrelization of the white race by the inferior races. I don't think a law that is based on such obvious and stated bigotry and racism should be allowed to exist today in modern America. The simple fix to me for the immigration problems, and to be clear, Hari, if I had a complete fix for the immigration problems, I wouldn't be telling it to you. I'd be telling it to the good people in Stockholm, and I'd be waiting for my price. All right, like it's a large issue. I don't have all of the answers here, right? But I think the first and most simple fix on the immigration issue is to make it a civil offense as opposed to a criminal offense, right? We have criminal laws for people who commit crime, including immigrants who commit crime. That is taken care of. What we don't need to do is to criminalize people who have committed no crime simply because they're here out of status, simply because they overstayed their visa, simply because they didn't fill out the right paperwork in the right form, in the right triplicate with the carbon copy, and get it notarized. Like that is not a criminal offense. That is a civil offense. Now, civil penalties can be significant. Civil penalties can be harsh. Civil penalties include deportation. That is a civil penalty in this country. And we can do that if we feel that a person has violated our laws in a civil sense. But throwing people in jail, taking them away from their children, throwing their children in jails or holding pens or concentration camps or whatever euphemism we're calling it today, that's immoral. That's wrong. And that doesn't need to happen. And the only reason why that does happen is because the 1921 Immigration and Nationalization Act, supported by people with the very most racist intentions possible, made it so. Before the 1921 Act, all immigration offenses were civil penalties, not criminal. And they could be again if we repealed that section of that law.
You mentioned the Immigration and Nationality Act passed in, 1952? And, when we look at something like Mahmoud Khalil, the pro-Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate student who's been in the center of a lot of discussion, he's a green card holder, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the INA gives him the authority to deport an alien whose presence or activities could have serious foreign policy consequences for America. What's wrong with that thinking?
It's tyrannical. It's tyrannical. People's legal status should not be up to the whim of any one official. That is what they do in tyrannies. In America, we are supposed to have process. We are supposed to have an opportunity to appeal. We are supposed to have evidence. What evidence is Rubio required to give under that subsection of the statute? Clear as I can read, none. It's his whim. And when you live under the whim of men, you live under the tyranny of men. It's that simple. That is a perfect example of why some of these bad laws, some of these old laws desperately need to be repealed because there are poison pills laced in them. Look, Hari, I read a whole book. I had a whole chapter on the Immigration Nationality Act. I didn't even know that section existed until Rubio pulled it out of his hat to justify jailing a valid green card holder. I didn't even know about it. And I'm an expert, right, in what I'm talking about. And I'm saying this is part of the problem, right? Because there are things in the laws that nobody really knows what they are, how they work, right? Until some usually person with bad intents pulls it out of their hat, right? And in this case, we have a situation where a person with bad intent is pulling it out of his hat to enact his whims, as opposed to anything approaching a normal legal process.
You also write in your book about the Stand Your Ground law. Most Americans became familiar with it in 2012 when George Zimmerman fatally shot 17-year-old Trayvon Martin because he thought he was well within his rights to do so. A little background on the law for our audience and what your problem is with it.
The law is the most provably racist law that we have. What Stand Your Ground says is that if you are legally in a place that you are allowed to be, right, and somebody, whatever, accosts you, annoys you, bothers you, threatens you, you can respond with deadly force. You can stand your ground, as it were, right? I mean, that's literally stand your ground is not just the tagline of the law. It is literally in the language of a lot of the laws in the various states that have them, right? When I say it's the most provably racist law that we have statistical evidence for, if you are a white person standing your ground and you are allegedly threatened or accosted or bothered or annoyed by a black person and you shoot that black person to death, you are 218 times more likely to be let off with no charges than if the races are reversed. If you're a black person and you stand your ground against a white person who threatens or accosts or assaults or annoys you. And that's how the law was kind of intended to function. The thing about stand your ground that a lot of people don't understand, what it does in terms of the legal structure of it, is that it immunizes the person who shot. It immunizes the shooter from even being charged with a crime and taken to trial. So if I'm white and I shoot a black person, I say I was standing your ground, and the cops believe me, I cannot be charged. I cannot be investigated. If the cops just take my word for it, understand your ground, that's it. That's the end of the inquiry. And that's also one of the reasons why the law is so disproportionately racist.
So what's to prevent the reform route, not just for Stand Your Ground, but a lot of the laws that you're talking about in the books versus complete repeal and overhaul?
Well, again, if you think about what the law was intended to do, what's the benefit of reforming it? Like, what's the benefit of reforming Stand Your Ground? We have laws protecting your right to self-defense. That's already a law. We don't need the stand your ground is a perfect example of a law that is only there to do bad things. If you are threatened with deadly force and you defend yourself with deadly force, we have an entire legal canon that's designed to figure out if your shooting was justified. We call it a justified homicide. There is an entire there's an entire common law background for that. And it's not easy, but like you can prove that you shot somebody in self-defense. Happens all the time. What do you need to stand your ground for?
So where do we go from here? I mean, what do you think people can do to make any kind of meaningful change if there are so many kind of structural and codified hurdles?
You got to change the structure. You got to change the structure. And one of the arguments that I make in the epilogue of the book is that one of the first places that I would start is changing the structure of Congress. Right now, most of your viewers know we are stuck at 435 congressmen, but a lot of your viewers don't know why. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says Congress can only be 435 people. We started with, 90 something. We quickly went to 137. We used to add Congress people every decennial census, right? So everybody now knows that you do the census and then you have to reapportion. And so New York loses 2 representatives to Arizona because before, we used, instead of taking congressmen from one state and putting it in another state, we just used to add more congressmen. We stopped doing that in 1920. And Hari, it's not because we ran out of chairs, all right? It's not because we lost the ability to make a bigger rotund. We stopped doing it in the 1920s because the 1920 census was the census that really showed the white ruling elite that the power of this country was moving away from the agricultural and rural centers into the urban areas. That you were going to have to add a lot more congressmen to represent a lot more people living in cities. And people got scared of that. If we had just kept going with our population increase and adding more congresspeople and keeping the level of per capita representation, that is how many people one congressman represents, if we had kept it steady from the 1920s, we'd have 1,200 people in Congress right now. Do you know how different our system looks with 1,200 congressmen instead of 435? It changes our entire polity. If you make representation in Congress, which is supposed to be the house of proportional representation, if you actually make it proportional, it changes the entire country. America is the least representative democracy in the world by the measure of per capita representation. One congressman here represents about 760,000 Americans, right? The next least representative government is Japan, where one member of their lower house represents around 520,000 Japanese people. So we are off the charts in terms of an unrepresentative place to live. And we could fix that. My solution in the book is called the Wyoming Plan. It ties representation to the representation of the least populous state, right? Because every state, no matter how small, gets one congressman. So the idea is that every congressman should represent the population of the least populous state. Right now, that's Wyoming. Wyoming has about 550,000 people. If you made every congressperson represent around 550,000 people, you would immediately go and get about 200 to 300 more congressmen. We can change the number of representatives in Congress by a simple piece of legislation, just like we artificially limited the number of congresspeople with a simple piece of legislation.
The book is called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Author Elie Mystal, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, earlier in the program, we discussed the acts that Elon Musk has been taking to critical agencies in a way that many believe could be unconstitutional and even illegal. In a new piece for The Atlantic, journalist Jonathan Chait warns that it is urgent for the legislature to reclaim its power before it's too late. And he tells Michelle Martin why too late could come a lot sooner than everyone thinks.
Thanks, Christian. Jonathan Chait, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
I want to talk about a couple of recent articles that you've written for The Atlantic, but I want to start with one where you say that the constitutional crisis is here. In plain language, what are the things that lead you to that conclusion?
Well, the Constitution's Article 1 gives Congress power over spending, and that's the system that we've had in this country for the entire existence of this republic. If Congress establishes an agency or a spending program, that is the law, and the president has to follow the law. Now, there have been disagreements about how the president handles that and the priorities, but that basic fact has not been challenged. And that fact is what the Trump administration is now challenging. They are claiming for themselves the right to eliminate any program or any agency that they don't like for any reason whatsoever. So that is totally new, and that would completely upend the balance of power between the branches of government.
Do you think that the public sees it as seriously as you do?
No, I don't, although you are seeing some evidence that President Trump's approval ratings are falling back a bit even just over the past couple of weeks. And you've seen that Elon Musk has grown unpopular. So I think the general idea that the administration is doing something radical and moving really fast is getting through to the public. And it's common for presidents to come in and think the public wants them to undertake radical change. This is a mistake that presidents of both parties have made, and assume that the public will reward them for moving things really fast, and that's usually not the case. And this seems to be another instance in which that same mistake is being made.
So what are some of the moves that the president, with Elon Musk in the lead, this tech mogul, richest man in the world, what are some of the decisions that they've taken that have caused this kind of alarm? Describe what's going on here. Yeah.
Well, they put out this very broad and confusing memo that seemed to just suspend the entire federal government's operations, in which threw lots of people justifiably into a panic before a court sort of slapped them down. But now they're trying to do a version of that seemingly piecemeal. You've got Musk holed up in the Eisenhower building next to the White House, just kind of going through the federal budget and without having much expertise to do this job, determining which programs he considers wasteful or fraudulent or part of some kind of left-wing conspiracy that he imagines has been going on for years, and in trying to just zero out those programs or declare them dead. And then meanwhile, they're sending out letters to the whole federal workforce, urging them to retire immediately. And some people are figuring out whether they should take that offer or whether it is an offer at all or whether it's even legal. And all these things are very hard to determine. So they're just throwing sand into the gears of the machine, or they're just jamming up the machine as hard and fast as they can without having a very close idea of how it operates and what the effects of all this might be on the people who are relying on these government services.
One of the things that has really set off red flags for a lot of people is that Musk and this group of young software engineers, apparently, some of them, we're told that one of them is as young as 19 years old, most of them are in their early 20s, have had access to the Treasury's system for dispersing government funds.
Right.
And this has heretofore been supervised by career employees. The career employee who was in charge of this was retired under duress, it seems, after he objected to them having access to this. Now, as we are speaking now, a federal judge has said they can only have limited access. Only two members of this team can have limited access. It's so-called read-only access. Would you just talk about why this is so concerning?
I don't think anybody knows exactly what they're doing, and that's part of the reason for the concern. We do know, though, that they've misled the public about this. They said that Musk only had read-only access to this information, but reporters found that they didn't. They actually had access to go in and change the outcomes of these payments. So what people think, although, I don't want to just pass on speculation as fact, but it seems as if Musk is inclined to use this tool to advance this anti-government agenda that he's set out for himself. That basically, instead of going to Congress and saying, we think this program is too big or this agency should be shuttered, they're just going to unilaterally cut off the payments to whatever programs that they think shouldn't exist, just going straight to the end point. And so that would accomplish his work immediately. And even if the courts were to step in and say, you can't do this, the damage of moves like this would be so difficult to reverse that they might functionally succeed in their goal, even if it's illegal.
President Trump and his kind of designated agent in this, Elon Musk, have been arguing that these programs are either inefficient or, in their words, corrupt. What do you say to that?
Look, there are inefficient programs in the federal government, and there are certainly inefficient systems that prevent the government from functioning efficiently. And I know of some policy wonks who've been writing about this and trying to make the government work better. It's very frustrating that they're not listening to people like that who have real expertise and actually want to make the government more cost effective and more efficient, and instead seem to be just running rampant through the government, picking out programs that have names that sound weird to them, or which they just make seat of the pants guesses are doing something bad or something progressive, and just zero them out with any real thought. So it's frustrating as someone who wants to make government more efficient that they're not doing this in any kind of careful or respectable way.
Before we move on to the constitutional crisis aspect, because that is your larger point, that this isn't just about an overreach in one area by a person who is inexperienced, doesn't really know how the government works, what it does, is that he seems particularly fixated on U.S. aid, which distributes humanitarian aid. The president and Elon Musk seem particularly fixated on this, to the point of using some very disparaging language to talk about the people who do this work and the work that they're doing. Why are they so fixated on these agencies? Do you have this particular agency, do you have any sense of that?
That's a great question, and I've tried to figure it out. It's one irony, and I'm actually working on a story about this, is that the Marxist left hates USAID, has always hated USAID. And the reason they hate it is that it is a tool of American foreign policy. And as such, it was designed to counter the effects of communism, now counters the effects of the Chinese Communist Party globally. By providing humanitarian aid throughout the unaligned world, it tries to show the world that the United States cares about them. So it's a kind of joint diplomatic humanitarian mission. So describing it as Marxist is really an inversion of the truth. Now, why they came to this, as you say, is very, very hard to understand. If you wanted to give them credit for being clever, you'd say the American public doesn't like foreign aid. The American public massively overestimates the amount of the budget that goes to foreign aid. So one reason people don't like foreign aid is because they think we're spending far more on it than we are. But it is a soft target. And if they want to establish the principle that the White House has the right to terminate any federal program that it wants without going through Congress, you want to start with the softest target to begin with, and then you've established the principle, and you can start going after harder targets. And that would really enable conservatives to advance policy goals that they've always wanted to do, right? You've got large chunks of the conservative movement that have opposed the expansions of government that have taken place since the New Deal and the Great Society, but considered a lot of these large spending programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security to be popular and difficult to cut or to privatize. But if they could just do it at the White House with the snap of the fingers and not have to have a vote in Congress, not to have public accountability, that would be a generational change in the structure of government and advance a lot of their goals.
One of the arguments that you make in your piece is that, look, if this is a constitutional crisis, this speaks to a neutering of the third branch of government, which is the Congress, then presumably everybody in Congress should be concerned.
Or the first branch of government, I think, is the founders designed it to be the first branch. Congress is supposed to be preeminent.
The first branch. But the question I would have for you is, why are they not more jealous of their own institutional imperatives?
Well, right. What you've identified is really a longstanding flaw in the Constitution. And neither of us is the first person to identify this, but the founders weren't thinking about political parties when they designed the system. Parliamentary forms of government are designed with parties in mind. You have party control as in the core of how those systems are supposed to operate. But what the American Constitution designed was they imagined that these separate branches would operate as branches independently of each other, right? So that they would be jealous of their powers and make sure the other branches didn't impinge upon their control. So you would have Congress making sure the president didn't take too much power because Congress would want to make sure the Congress is strong. And the president would do the same thing vis-a-vis Congress, and the executive branch and the legislature and the judicial branch would all check each other. But parties upend those incentive systems, right? When you've got Congress and the president controlled by the same party, members of Congress just want the president to succeed. Now, that's a long-standing feature of American politics, but it's kind of risen to a new height under the Republican Party because Donald Trump has so much power over other Republicans. The Republican Party has come to define its ideology almost entirely in whatever terms Donald Trump sets. And Trump has shown that he can just change what the party stands for overnight, and most Republicans will follow him instantaneously. He's also shown that any Republicans who defy him, he can say that they're a rhino or a Republican in name only, and support a primary challenge against them and probably end their political career.
So let's talk about the Democrats now, because you've also been writing about them.
Yeah.
You're not impressed.
No.
You're not impressed. Say more.
Well, I wrote a piece about the Democratic National Committee's recent meeting where they elevated their leader and sort of had a bit of a discussion about what's happened in the past and where they want to go. And you've got to be a little bit careful talking about a meeting like this because the Democratic National Committee sounds like it would be in charge of the Democrats, but it's really an organization that has relatively limited power. If you're a Democrat running for office, you don't have to go to the Democratic National Committee to find out what to say or who's going to be the candidate in your district. Well, that's determined by voters. But I think you can't just stop there because the reason, or at least one reason, the DNC is so powerless is that a lot of the power over the Democratic Party has been ceded to the progressive movement infrastructure over the past 15 to 20 years. Progressive activist groups financed privately by donors, often very liberal donors, have advanced a series of causes and, environmental justice and reproductive justice and racial justice. And all those activists have set out to push the party to the left since the second Obama term, and they've had tremendous amounts of success in pushing them to the left. But I think in a lot of ways, they've pushed the party to the left of where the public is and where they were winning during the Obama era, and have had some responsibility for the defeats of the last election. And what I noticed in the DNC meetings is there didn't seem to be any acknowledgement of this problem. They just seemed to be doubling down on the same buzzwords and the same analysis that got them into the problem in the first place.
So but what about members of Congress? I mean, they have, again, some of them have been in office for a long time. They have their own standing in their communities. They have their own reputations. So, where is the leadership there? I mean, is the simple problem here that there is no figure who commands the respect of, or at least the followership of sufficient numbers of even members of Congress to kind of create I don't know any other word to use, although it's become kind of a buzzword, a resistance.
Yeah.
Is that the issue? Is it a failure of sort of the leadership personalities?
Well, look, I think we should be a little bit patient in assessing this situation. I think it's a very common problem for a party that's shut out of power to lack effective voice and effective leaders because they just don't have a power base from which to operate it. And usually when parties come back, it's not because of the ideas that they're developing in opposition or the charisma of the leaders they have in opposition. It's because the ruling party, the governing party, overreaches and creates a backlash, and then the opposition party finds ways to exploit that backlash. I think whatever leaders the Democratic Party develops are going to come out of the presidential primary that's going to begin in 3 years or so, and they're going to figure out whatever issues resonate most with the public, whatever failures of this administration they can run against and craft a message. But my concern is that while they position themselves to do that, they recognize that they can't also take on a bunch of positions that are too far to the left of where the public is, that'll make it impossible for them to take advantage of public discontent with Trump.
And Rashad, before we let you go, the courts. I mean, so far the courts have been have confronted Trump and his agenda at multiple points. I mean, they've already said one federal judge has said, look, this idea of eliminating, birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment is overreach. But there's another argument to suggest that that's his goal, is to get some of these issues in court, because he does believe he appointed 3 of the current Supreme Court justices They have demonstrated that they have a maximalist view of executive power. Is there any effective check on the actions of this president?
Well, you're certainly right that that's one. They have basically two routes by which this can work. One is that they just get these cases to court and they win, and they change the precedent, and they get the court to say, actually, the executive branch can just unilaterally eliminate any spending program it doesn't like. Now, that seems to violate the plain text of the Constitution and the way it's been understood for over 200 years. But the Constitution is whatever the 5 most conservative justices say it is. So if that's what they say it is, that's what it is. Secondly, it's possible that they're going to lose, but they'll move so fast that they'll have an effect anyway. That once you drive out the staff, the expertise, the institutional knowledge in a lot of these agencies, because they can't sit around waiting forever to see if they win in court. They've got to go on their lives. They've got mortgages to pay. They've got things to do with their lives. You won't be able to rebuild it. So I think that the second danger is probably more serious than the first, but either one is a possibility.
Jonathan Chait, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Now, in these dark times, having a good laugh matters more than ever. After winning an Emmy for his 2022 show, Rothaniel, and turning his life into a reality show for a documentary series, comedian Jared Carmichael is back with a new HBO comedy special, Don't Be Gay. It delves into race and romance and lets the world into some of his most intimate moments.
I still have to express my feelings, and I have to tell him when he's hurt my feelings. And that's really difficult for me to do because that is really gay.
Carmichael joins Michelle Martin now to explain why confronting discomfort has become central to his stand-up.
Thanks, Christian. Gerard Carmichael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
So, a lot of people love your work. They've followed your work. They've followed you through thick and thin. But for people who don't know your work and they only know your latest project, what would you say?
I would say I think it's an hour of good stand-up comedy. I think I moved to LA with the hopes of being like a funny comedian, and I like experimented with form for many years. And this is like, I think my best work, my best outing doing like kind of traditional stand-up comedy. It's like jokes and storytelling. And that was the hope was that people would laugh, that it's just like an update on someone's life in a relationship, trying to figure out what to do with like aging parents, I think it's just like kind of classic in that way.
You seem very relaxed, I have to say.
I feel good. I, just had the physical, my cholesterol is down, so I feel good.
You've alluded to this. You kind of push the boundaries of comedy and self-discovery in a way that is often very funny, but also very poignant, and has some pain points in it. You've gone from Rothaniel to your HBO reality series, which is very real and raw, kind of led us into some really raw private moments. Yeah. And now your latest project, the stand-up special, is Don't Be Gay. Yeah. And I don't feel really good saying that, but
I love you so much. I love you reacting to it is my favorite thing.
Okay, but now that I've said it once, I'm not going to say it again. But why is it that? Why is that the title?
Well, because after coming out, it made me reflect. I've been doing like a lot of reflection and therapy and all of those things, like just reflecting on my life and what I was hiding and why I was hiding, and thinking about masculinity a lot.
And when you're raised straight, you know there's only one rule. Don't be gay. I broke the only rule, y'all.
I named it after my internal monologue that I've had going on repeat in my life, just don't be gay. And it's caused me to be so self-aware. It's like the burden of self-awareness, which is a strength in comedy because you get to talk about that. But like the burden is that you always like watching your mannerisms and how you interact with people and how you move in a room and like how I talk and how I'm holding my hands, like all these things I'm hyper aware of. And so it's kind of ironically named, just because it's like that's what I was telling myself and what I was fighting. That was the biggest fight of my life.
Well, it's a bookend to Rothaniel in the sense that Rothaniel talks about being in the closet, really. It is the public way in which you announced yourself, but it takes you on that kind of trip. And is this in a way, is this the bookend? This is like the,
I would call it more really an update. I think my career is always just like an update to exactly where I am at the moment. This is my first time and hopefully the only time in a relationship that allows me to like see myself, and I'm living with someone else, and like now I'm like writing a lot of material around that, and so it's an update to exactly where I am in my life. Before, and like in reality show, I didn't think I deserved love. There was a lot of shame. It was a lot of confusion around like how I would settle. I didn't think I would settle. And now just feeling settled and having other sources of conflict in my life. This is just where I am right now. And the next project hopefully will just be an update to exactly where I am then. But like now I'm like, I'm in a relationship, in an open relationship, 38, my cholesterol's down 35 points, Michelle.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's kind of all done, right? I mean,
yeah.
Well, the relationship part is so interesting to me because the kind of married guy comedy is its own genre, right?
Yeah.
Dating guy comedy is its own genre. Married guy comedy is its own genre. Now, you didn't indicate whether you and Michael are married. You said you have an open relationship.
No,
you said
but you know what's funny?
To be.
I propose like 3 times a month. He keeps saying no to me. I propose all the time. And usually at the end of an argument, I got to talk that through in therapy, like something's wrong. But at the end of an argument, I was like, let's just get married. And he's like, no. He just walks away from me.
The other thing I think, in sort of traditional like married guy comedy that people are used to, or even married woman comedy, maybe Joan Rivers being one example of that, extreme example.
Yeah.
But is you sort of play off your differences. In your case, the differences that you play off of are racial, right? Because your boyfriend is white.
Yeah.
And so you talk about that. But there's one joke you tell about how he was the one who wanted to have the open relationship and you had a different idea. Your idea was?
My idea was to cheat and to live a secret life and let the lie weigh on my soul and come home and sit quietly in the driveway for a real long time, just like my dad.
Like that's the traditional way. It's just like open relationship is strange. It's so strange, and it goes against everything I was taught about marriage and relationships and like keeping someone happy. And it forces me to have a very difficult conversation all the time. It does not get easier. It's an honest conversation, but it's the hardest conversation ever all the time.
But the other thing you play off of is communication styles.
Sometimes my boyfriend says stuff in a way that lets me know he's never been punched in the face before. You know what I mean? Like it's a tone that he uses. Like he's passive aggressive sometimes, and like passive aggression is white violence.
Say more about that. Is that a communication styles? Or you think that was kind of a black-white thing?
That's upbringing. That may be black-white. That may be like a certain. It may be just where I'm from. There was a threat. Like you say the wrong thing, you speak in the wrong tone. Like there's a threat. Like like my mom would go get a switch from the tree. Like I wasn't allowed to like just communicate freely. Let's just say like it's part of what makes you a comedian is finding creative ways to say what you mean, like because there was a threat, or just at school or anything, there's a threat to like just saying something. My boyfriend's able to just he was able to express himself without violence. And I noticed that in the house. I'm like, wow, the way in a different environment, I could punch you right now and everybody would be on my side. But I'm not in that environment. Yeah, I'm not in that environment anymore. But it makes me think about, I think about communication styles, like living with someone who didn't grow up the way I grew up. It's interesting to me.
But that's all of us. I mean, I think that's why the program, that's the hour, the special is about you as a Black gay man in this world who's come into his own. But I think, isn't that partly why everybody's laughing? Because they realize, oh yeah, none of us is married to the person we grew up in the same house with or partnered with or whatever, you know?
Yes. And it makes you reflect. I have a line in a special that's like, I take anything that they do to better themselves as a personal indictment against me. Like, just like he wakes up before me and it makes me feel lazy, you know, like, and it's like that type of thing. You're comparing, always comparing. You're like, oh, you do things differently than me. There's some really personal things in here. One of the things that I found interesting is how many people have seen in your work through time a comfort for people who cannot say the things, who have experienced the things that you've experienced, but don't have the words to express them. And it's comforting for them to feel like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels that way. I'm not alone in this. You know, I'm not, that self-doubt, that internalized homophobia, that struggle with being free of it and stuff like that. And I just wondered if do you ever think about that? Do people stop you on the street and say, hey man, you gave me words that you said something that I felt but couldn't say? Does people ever say that to you? They do. I'm actually stopping myself from crying in this moment. Because that is I haven't felt responsibility in art before. I thought I was just talking and I just say what I want and express myself how I want. And then in recent years, I've started to feel a responsibility to put words to feelings. Which is different from just like before I just threw grenades and would just say, have a contrarian point and just say things, you know, because I thought it was funny. But now I do feel a responsibility to be honest and to articulate myself in a way that is, you know, true to the emotion. And it's my joy to do that. And it's my like pleasure to be able to do that. And it's like some of the best feedback in my life is that when people stop me on the street and they say like, oh, I've been feeling this way and you put words to that, is the great joy of my life.
Does it ever feel like a burden though? I mean, you've had a lot of public figures throughout history in different fields that are ostensibly entertainment, you know, like sports, right? And people who say things like, I don't want to be your role model, so just leave me alone. And I just wonder, does this recognition that people are looking to you now, does that change anything about the way you're approaching the work?
Well, that's part of the reason I don't like search my name on Twitter anymore is because one, bad things hurt your feelings, right? That's just a fact. Like you read something about, you know, your work or your appearance or anything and it can hurt. But even good things can cause you to get stuck. And part of the responsibility as an artist is to articulate true emotion, true feelings. And you can, and I think we see this a lot. Like the downside of that is like people like having kind of the hero complex, right? And it's like, all right, I'm going to carry all these people on my back. But then what happens is you stop being a human being. Like it's easy to like to be a hero and then you like hide the shades of yourself that are important to show. I don't know why this like example, you know, forgive me. I don't want to get in trouble for this, but like the example that always comes to mind, and I felt this way since I was a kid, is that you like Martin Luther King is like this incredible man who maybe is guilty of a few indiscretions, right? To me, the indiscretions is part of what makes him great, is that he also made mistakes, but was capable of doing something beautiful and amazing. And to me, like when you hide when you hide that part, like when it's like buried, then it's like it dehumanizes them. My favorite artists are ones that say, all right, I'm going to show you the bad side too. Like not to celebrate it, but just to tell you what happened. This is how I felt. This is what I did wrong. And to show that too it makes interesting art, but it also makes an interesting person.
But we are in a political moment when there is a lot of, I'll say, hostility directed at some of the groups that you belong to.
Yeah. Oh, it's scary.
It's hostility and a sense of resentment directed at at sort of public expressions of Blackness and of queerness. So I was just wondering if the political environment in any way affected your thinking about what to talk about.
It's all the more reason to show and tell everything to me, right? Because like I'm not gay because I like to like hold hands with a man, you know, and we wear our white robes and we hold hands and we go to church like the other, like that's not the part that makes me gay. I'm gay because of the stuff I talk about in the special. And like, that's just real. And I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to pretend to be something else, you know, and I think that's really, really important. And to your point, things are getting really scary. Like nobody's safe. Roe versus Wade being over, I can't believe that. I thought that was like written in a stone tablet. Like I thought, like, and so they're coming for everything. Like coming for everybody. And so like it's everybody's responsibility now to like, I don't know, to stand firm in who you are. And like to me, identity politics often shows one side of the identity, and I think it's important to show it all. I guess is all I'm saying. And I find that a part of my responsibility.
But is this another way of saying that gay people are normal and that the sex that you have is normal?
Yes. Yeah. And you know what else? I found is common: shame, guilt. These things are, it's not like, it's easy to say like, oh, you're gay and you felt a lot of shame. Everybody feels shame. I think I say this in a special. Everybody's in the closet about something. Like, I think everybody holds something really close to their chest that they don't want to share with anybody because they feel like if somebody finds out, then they won't be loved. They'll make them unlikable, make them unlovable. And like you could be gay, straight, anything, and you can have those feelings. And to me, that's the part I'm sharing my conflicting emotions about sex and my desire for sex and like showcasing my sexuality. Like I'm showing conflicting emotion about that because I think everybody has conflicting emotion about that. And so yeah, that's what, like talking to my friends about like their wives, I'm shocked by how much overlap there is just on a human level, you know?
Well, before I let you go, you know, if Nathaniel was about, you know, the fear, right, of being seen, and Don't Be Gay is about, I would say it's about the joy of standing in your truth and the joy of kind of taking off the mask, right? How do you feel now that you were able to, that you chose to take off the mask? How are you?
Good. I mean, it was the best decision of my life. It changed everything. That actually is probably what lowered the cholesterol 35 points. To be honest with you, like that probably is like part of what did it. And now it's like a whole new set of problems that I'm dealing with. I'm like, okay, you're out. And I had like a grace period where all of my mistakes were being celebrated by my friends. It was like, no, good for you, Gerard. Just live your truth, Gerard. Oh, we're so proud of you. And now in this relationship, it's like, all right, you're an adult. And you like, no, you have responsibility and you have like a person that you're responsible for. And like, now I'm hit with like really the real test, you know, but I feel so much better about, just being honest about who I am. Like it actually changed my life.
Well, I can't wait to see what you do next.
I'm so happy you took the time to talk to me. This felt really, really good. I want you to get out of DC just this weekend.
Okay, well, we'll figure that out. Gerard Carmichael, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Now, outrage over the surging presence of federal agents in Minneapolis continues as the United States reels from the deadly shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer last week. Minnesota and Illinois are now suing the Trump administration, while new calls to defund ICE are emerging amongst Democrats. But what about actual accountability for Good's death? 6 federal prosecutors quit yesterday after the Justice Department pushed for a criminal investigation into Renee Good's widow. Mike Fox is a legal fellow at the Cato Institute, and in a new article he highlights that this tragedy and its aftermath are part of a wider trend of federal impunity, as he tells Hari Srinivasan.
Christian, thanks. Mike Fox, thanks so much for joining us. Just this past week, Renee Good was shot and killed on a residential street in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent named Jonathan Ross. You wrote recently in an op-ed something that kind of caught our eye, which was that this is part of a pattern. And tell us, what is that pattern?
Yeah, Hari, good to be here. Thanks for having me. So, it's difficult to get data from the government, from Border Patrol, from ICE, from the Department of Homeland Security. There's been a pretty good investigative report from the Wall Street Journal, and then I took what they wrote and tried to parse through. And from what I can gather, since July, the immigration enforcement, be it ICE or Border Patrol, have shot 13 times at individuals in cars. Of those, they've hit 8 people, 2, including Renee Good, were killed. So one of the patterns that's emerged in these cases is as soon as the government shoots someone in a vehicle, and by the government, I'm referring to ICE and Border Patrol, the propaganda machine, Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin, who's the communications guru for the Department of Homeland Security, starts, trying to frame the narrative in a way that the agents are always right and the civilians are always wrong, trying to sanitize their hands, paint the person who was shot at as being some horrific, violent criminal. They were already calling Renee Good a domestic terrorist, taking the side of the officers who were accused of killing them. The reality is, there were many instances where this is what Ms. McLaughlin was saying, and it's been objectively false, and it's been proven false. We've seen a number of instances where she's alleged people have committed these heinous crimes only for the cases to fall apart the second they get into court.
One of the things that you wrote about that I want to highlight for our audience, you said, the tragedy of the Good case is compounded by a legal regime that all but ensures federal agents remain untouchable by civil damages lawsuits. If Good's surviving family members attempt to sue Ross and the agents involved in her shooting for violating her civil rights, they will almost certainly find no remedy in a courtroom. How?
It's pretty clear. If you pull the Department of Homeland Security use of force guidelines, which were last updated in 2023, ICE and Border Patrol are bound by those guidelines. They're required to follow them. It's also pretty obvious that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are not going to take any remedial measures. They're not going to punish him, dock his pay, fire him, do anything like that. So the only other ways that would be to hold him or other agents, federal agents, accountable for constitutional violations would be criminal case, which is obviously we're not going to see the Trump administration federally prosecute this, and prosecuting at the state level poses a number of legal challenges. And that's assuming that the investigators from the federal investigators with the FBI even cooperate with the state investigators to give them the evidence and the transcripts of interviews and body cam footage and things that would be necessary to pursue a criminal case, which they pretty clearly are trying to screen Minnesota investigators out of. So civil damages would be what most people think. And what that is that's the ability to go into court and seek money damages when your constitutional rights have been violated. In 1871, Congress passed a law that's commonly known as Section 1983. And that law was passed following the Civil War. There were newly freed slaves in the South who had all these wonderful rights on paper, but as they went to vindicate them or to exercise them, they were finding state and local officials in the South were precluding those rights from being exercised. So Congress passed this law allowing private citizens to go into court and seek monetary damages against state and local officials. That has never been extended to the federal government. And if you think about why, it kind of makes sense, right? At the time in the 1870s, the ones violating the Constitution were the states and local governments in the South. They were not the federal government. But also historically, the federal government's been one of enumerated powers. It's very small, was never intended to do a whole lot. Flash forward about 100 years, and the federal government is involved in every aspect of our lives. So in 1965, there's a gentleman named Webster Bivens. Webster Bivens is in his Brooklyn apartment, minding his own business, when the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which was the precursor to the DEA, or the Drug Enforcement Administration, barged in without a warrant, strip searched him, and made an arrest. Mr. Bivens decided to take his case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And 6 years later, the court read an implied right of action to sue federal officials for Fourth Amendment violations. Over the years, the court extended it a little bit, but the court over the past few decades has become increasingly reluctant to extend Bivens. Some of the more conservative justices want to actually get rid of it entirely. There were two cases within the past decade or so where the court just could have extended Bivens to immigration enforcement contexts, and both times the court did not do so, citing unfounded national security concerns. It's also worth noting, of course, that the cases that we're talking about now, by and large, don't even deal with immigration enforcement. Ms. Good was a U.S. citizen. They deal with street-level policing. But because the court has so withered away Bivens and never extended it to the immigration context, and because the statutory cause of action, Section 1983, only applies to state and local actors, if your constitutional rights are violated by federal agents like ICE agents or Border Patrol agents, you are without recourse to get into federal court. And the other point that I would make is, on the off chance that you somehow get into federal court, like in some utopian world where I become a federal judge and allow the case to proceed, you're still not going to get recourse because there's this doctrine known as qualified immunity. And that doctrine was created by the Supreme Court in the 1960s, and it stands in direct contradiction of the statute I mentioned earlier called Section 1983. And what qualified immunity does is it says that unless you can identify a case where the exact same thing happened in the exact same jurisdiction, so unless Ms. Good's family could go into court and prove that an ICE agent violated someone else's rights in the exact same way that their loved one's rights were violated in the Eighth Circuit, which is where Minnesota stands, they have no redress. And of course, qualified immunity only matters if Congress were to codify Bivens, or if the court were to recognize a implied right to sue federal immigration agents in the first place. So these two doctrines working together make it all but impossible to ever get into federal court seeking civil damages.
If I'm hearing you correctly, her family would have more rights for recourse if it was a Minneapolis police officer or a state police officer that did this, right? And you're saying that given the way that the laws are structured today, a federal agent can, in broad daylight, shoot someone and not be held accountable depending on the administration's interests.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's say instead of being shot by an ICE agent, she was shot by a Minneapolis police officer, right? She could sue. She could then get into federal court. She could bring a cause of action under Section 1983. Of course, unless she could find another case in the Eighth Circuit where someone's rights were violated in exactly the same way, the officer will likely benefit from qualified immunity. So it's a monumental battle. Yeah. But at least there's a way to initially get into court. Whereas with the federal agent for constitutional violations, there's not. And yeah, I think most people are shocked when they see the impunity that federal agents can act with. They can literally gun a woman down on a public street in broad daylight and face absolutely zero semblance of accountability. That should shock people to the core.
Well, tell me a little bit about the other cases that have happened, including some shootings. I mean, there's a shooting of Carlitos Ricardo Parias last October in South Los Angeles. Another case of a woman named Marimar Martinez, who was shot by Border Patrol agents in Chicago. What happened in these cases, and how do they fit the pattern that you've been talking about?
Yeah, so both of those cases you mentioned are notable, and they both had their cases dismissed. Ms. Martinez was stopped had an encounter in Chicago where the government again alleged that she tried to run officers or federal agents off the road, tried to ram them, justifying them to shoot at her. Interestingly enough, there was video that showed that the agents actually tried to surround or ram her vehicle. To my knowledge, that has not been made public. I have not seen it. But the government moved to dismiss the case, which the judge granted. And then in the other case that you mentioned, Mr. Carlitos, he had his case dismissed by a federal judge, by a U.S. District Court judge, because the government was not complying with discovery obligations. They would not turn over body camera footage timely. I believe they were also impeding his ability to interface with counsel and assist in his own defense. These are some egregious constitutional violations. So I want to, emphasize that it's not just ICE and Border Patrol who hold responsibility here. It's also federal prosecutors. I was a public defender. I was never a prosecutor. But I can tell you, if I want to bring the full weight of the federal government down on someone, I want to be sure that the agents who are alleging what they did are credible, and be sure that the conduct that they allege actually happened and that I can prove it in court, right? So if I'm later discovering videos that exonerate someone, I should not be charging them in the first place. Thankfully, federal judges are by and large faithful adherents to the Constitution, are putting a stop to it.
I just want to get your reaction to a statement that Tricia McLaughlin made to Time magazine after this shooting. It said it's a pattern of vehicles being used as weapons by violent agitators to attack our law enforcement. Dangerous criminals, whether they be illegal aliens or U.S. citizens, are assaulting law enforcement and turning their vehicles into weapons to attack law enforcement. Within minutes and hours of an incident, you see the spokespeople or even leadership coming out before there is an opportunity for everyone just to get the facts on the ground of what happened. I mean, is that strategic and tactical?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the end goal is to try to make the government look like the good guys and make anyone they deal with look bad, look like a domestic terrorist, portray a certain perspective. They're professional agitators. They're people with extensive criminal histories. Now, has ICE and Border Patrol arrested some violent offenders with extensive criminal histories? Oh, yeah. There's some cases ongoing for serious charges. I would note, though, that not a single one of these cases that I mentioned coming from July has resulted in a criminal conviction or a guilty plea. Now, of course, that could be because it's only January and cases can take a long time to move. But there's been 4 cases already that I'm aware of where cases have been dismissed. There's been several where they've yet to be filed. It's just a matter of what matters most. Does following the Constitution and vindicating people's rights matter? Or does framing the narrative that Stephen Miller wants pushed around the country and Gregory Bovino wants people to believe is true matter more than the Constitution? I think it's pretty clear which the answer is here.
So right now, you are also seeing lawsuits from the state of Minnesota and the state of Illinois against the federal government. They're claiming, among several things, look, this is a violation of the 10th Amendment. I mean, we are having to push all of our police officers to all these different events instead of the jobs that they need to do, and that the federal agents are terrorizing communities. Now, what's the likelihood that lawsuits like this against the federal government go forward?
Yeah, so it's important to distinguish. So these lawsuits are seeking injunctive relief. What they're doing is they're asking a federal judge, in this case, the state of Minnesota, the state of Illinois, are asking a federal judge. We've seen these cases happen in other jurisdictions. Cato Institute just filed an amicus brief in support of a challenge in Kern County, California, in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. What they're asking is they're asking a federal judge to issue an injunction barring the agencies from operating as they are, from violating the Constitution prolifically, from terrorizing civilians, and just all they're really asking is for the agencies to follow the law and do what they're supposed to do. From what I understand, the Attorney General of Minnesota simply wants ICE to conduct immigration enforcement, which is what ICE is supposed to do. I don't think that's in any way unreasonable. Now, the question as to how successful these lawsuits are going to be depends, right? We've seen some cases where there's been success in the lower courts. I think eventually the Supreme Court's going to have to deal with the merits of these cases. And, by and large, there'll be different questions. The questions in some of them is, can the government stop people or seize people on account of something like ethnicity and the fact that they're outside a Home Depot or working at a farm? If you open the Constitution, the answer couldn't be clearer. We don't live in a world where your Fourth Amendment rights depend upon the color of your skin or what country you were born in. Unfortunately, not everyone agrees with that. And then you have other questions like, are the courts going to be willing to stop what's going on in Minnesota and what's going on in Illinois? I certainly hope so, right? The courts are really our last line of defense here.
But is there anything that Congress can do to constrain how federal troops act on U.S. soil?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about federal troops as in the military. I'm talking about ICE and Border Patrol. Yeah. So Congress controls the power of the purse, right? Congress can give ICE and Border Patrol as much or as little money as they would like, right? Obviously, if Congress were to cut their budget in half, that would dramatically impede their ability to do what they're doing. That would be one way Congress could do it, right? Other things Congress could do is pass laws that have, aggressive enforcement mechanisms. Like, for instance, ICE and Border Patrol agents cannot categorically, under any circumstance, wear a mask or balaclava on the job. They must have their name and employer on them at all times. But those policies alone don't accomplish anything because the government just ignores them. So you would have to tie it into something. Well, if they don't follow it, they lose X amount of funding. Or if they don't follow it, at any time there's some type of proceeding that gets brought in court, there's an inference against the agent or something like that. That's one thing that we could do. The other thing, and I think the most important thing Congress can do, is codify, expand Bivens, and abolish qualified immunity. So together, what that would say is, if your rights are violated by a federal agent, you can go into federal court, you can sue under whatever statute this would be that Congress would create. And by the way, the agents do not get qualified immunity. So that question will actually go to a jury. And a jury is the body that the framers intended to adjudicate disputes between citizens and their government. So in cases like Ms. Goods, what jurors would be asked to deal with is something like, was the force used by Officer Ross objectively reasonable under the circumstances? So they could ask questions like, is jumping in front of or walking in front of a moving vehicle contributing to the danger? And is that something that should be considered? These are questions that jurors are supposed to get to decide. But instead, because we don't have a way to get these cases to them, they're not able to do that.
Right now, I think the perception is that the president has the authority and the control of several troops that should be along the border, to be in the middle of the country. Obviously, we understand that he's the commander in chief and he can have military operations take place overseas. But right now, I don't know who should be in charge of this level of deployment. If you have 1,000, 2,000 new agents coming into a specific community.
Of course, the president does have the power to decide how to deploy federal agents and in what capacity. But that power is not unlimited. It's constrained by the Constitution. He can't just do whatever they want, unleash agents into communities with orders to terrorize people and openly flout the Constitution, right? So that is not an absolute power. And of course, Congress controls the power of the purse, right? If Congress wanted to put in a no funds may be spent to deploy agents to cities, they could easily do that. It's not in a lack of ability. It's a lack of desire.
Legal fellow of the Cato Institute Project on Criminal Justice, Mike Fox. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.